I don't think it's gonna work. Nope.
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of Uinta Garage. In the last video, we installed 538 gears for the 14 bolt in the back of the GMC Jimmy. You can find a link to that video in the description below. This time, we're giving the front Dana 60 the same treatment. Lower 538 gears, along with a front Spartan Locker, rounding out the upgrades. We'll be covering some of the tips and tricks Eric has learned from doing many gear installs over the years.
Some of the numbers are right down, and then we can just do the math.
Short side.
Sometimes setbacks happen, like ordering the wrong locker for your build. Eric and Josh were breaking down the carrier and noticed the locker wasn't right. While waiting on the right parts to be shipped, we moved forward with setting up the gears.
So we made setup bearings. So if you look at that, see how easy that comes on and off? You take a carbide burr in like a die grinder and you make sure it's a carbide, or else you spend an hour possibly? When the rest of us are in here and you don't realize it's not a carbide. So you need a carbide burr on a die grinder to hollow this out. You can actually buy setup bearings. And when you start, you use your factory shim stack. So when you take this carrier apart, you need to pay attention to where everything came out of so that you can start. See, that slides on and off. So backlash on the 14 bolt set by adjusters that you can move with a screwdriver. You need setup bearings for a Dana 60 because they go right there, and then that goes on right there, and then you can't adjust them without taking these bearings off. Dana 60, at least these Dana 60s in a Chevy, the old Dodge and Chevy Dana 60s, you don't need a solid spacer because it's already a solid spacer more or less. These shims are kind of beat up. This is an oil slinger, helps move oil around. You can see it on the old pinion and on the new pinion right here. And we showed you the difference on the 14 bolt. That's 456s, right, Ryan?
Yeah, 456 and 513s.
That's a big difference in the Dana 60. So the pinion head's a little bit weaker, less teeth on it, less girth. So, but the gearing's gonna make up for it.
Yeah.
And we're gonna use the press on this. You would just put the race on the bearing, and then you can just flip this upside down and put it on a press and press this on. Now, the shims in a Dana 60, they actually go behind this race. You can put them underneath here, but that's much harder. So to do a setup bearing for the shims on a Dana 6, on most Dana axles, so you guys running half-ton stuff, this is the same thing. If you're running a Dana 44 or even a 10 bolt, you just grind the outside edge of this so you can slip this in and out of where it goes, so you can change the shims super easy. And then that goes on there like that. And we're gonna press this on. We've got our ring gear bolted on here. We'll put our locker in here soon, and we're gonna press this on and start setting up this Dana 60. Ryan will soon be able to do awesome burnouts very soon. All burnouts all day, no matter what.
So since we ground these out with the carbide burr, and they now slip on and off because they didn't do that before. After everything is set and we get the right shims, then we can press on the new bearings and have it be permanently fixed, right?
Yeah, so these are just for setup, and since these are old bearings, they might be a little bit looser. So you get the backlash set correctly, and then you press on the new bearings and you double check. You always double check. So once the new bearings are pressed on, then you recheck your backlash. It rarely changes. But yeah, as soon as you get your backlash set, that is when you put on the new bearings.
Cool. And this came with the kit too. What does
Yeah.
it get to?
So this did not come out of Ryan's differential. So this actually goes in the differential just like this. This is actually a restrictor to keep oil. So that goes right there. This is our setup bearing for our top. And so your top pinion bearing goes right there. This is actually an oil restrictor. If you have a low pinion Dana 60, you can get away without using this, but using it just helps this upper pinion bearing stay oiled. If you are running a high pinion Dana 60, if you leave this out, you'll burn up your upper bearing. So we're actually gonna put this on, and when you use this, you actually have to measure this thickness because this goes where the shims go. So you have to measure that thickness and add a shim stack in that equals this thickness, so that when you all get done and you have your final shim thickness setting up for pinion depth, you can take the shims out and add this in. Lots of measuring, lots of 0.000s.
So that just helps keep oil in the bearing instead of letting it slosh back down
Yep.
to the bottom of the differential. Okay.
Yep, helps keep oil to that bearing right there. And that's important in our off-road stuff because, as you know, a lot of us, we have to run shims in the front for vibrations or for just driveline angles to prevent binding.
Yeah.
And so that puts that pinion, instead of being like that, where it usually is, it can put that pinion in an angle. So keeping this upper bearing oiled is important. So we're gonna add this into Ryan's axle.
Sweet. Let's do it.
And it'll be oiled and lubricated.
With the new ring gear and pinion installed, it was time to get the initial backlash and gear pattern. Eric likes to channel his inner Bob Ross when marking gears.
So an important thing to know when you're painting the teeth is there are no mistakes, just happy little accidents, little patterns here, little happy patterns there.
Cool.
So this is my preferred method of doing this because it runs the gear around a bunch more times. Go ahead, Ryan. And what I'm doing right here is I'm actually pressing my hand against it to just load it just a little bit. And it just gives you a truer pattern. It gives you a better pattern. Okay, Ryan, stop. There we go. Okay, so if you come over here and you look at like those two right there, see those two right there? How you've got that really, really sharp line on the bottom? You can see it right there too. You've got that sharp line on the bottom. So that gives an indication that our pinion is too deep, and it's not extremely deep. Typically speaking, when you have a pattern that's too deep, if you're new at setting up gears, you want to make a big change. So I would probably recommend to somebody to probably take 30 thousandths out of this. So you want to go a bunch the opposite direction, and that will give you a clear indicator that the answer is somewhere in the middle. I've done this a lot, so I'm hoping we'll probably take 15 out of it and hopefully get it. So, but you can see that right there, and then you can flip it on the other side. Right here, that knife edge on the bottom. You want nice rounded patterns. If you have a flat edge like that is on the bottom, right there, you can see it right there too. I didn't paint those very well. Then that gives you an indication. Knife edge on the bottom means your pinion is too deep. Knife edge up on the top means your pinion is too shallow. So we're gonna take some shims out and run another pattern.
All right, Eric, so we've got the pinion out here again, just doing some final assembly, right? We measured the shim stack out of the old pinion and matched up the shims that we got with the new set, and we set these on. How does that affect everything here on this new setup?
So this is kind of hard to wrap your head around because you're using shims underneath here. But when you think about this, okay, this is just opposed bearings. Ignore the shims and just think about your setting the preload on like your wheel bearings on your trailer or on your front axle. That's all we're doing right here is exactly like a wheel bearing. You have to set them to a certain tightness so that everything stays tight and it doesn't wibble wobble around. Because if this wobbles around, if there's no preload on this, the pinion can actually start walking. Yeah, it walks up. So it'll walk away from the ring gear and up a little bit.
That's how you bust off teeth, right?
Yeah, and that's how you break off teeth. Because if the pinion gear is walking up and out of the tooth, the pattern comes up to the edge of the tooth, and that's when you break off teeth. So yeah, you literally, that's a wheel bearing right there, more or less. It's two opposed bearings, and you're setting the preload just like you would on your wheel bearing.
So since we measured against the original shim stack, and we're just matching that now, if that needs to be adjusted, how do we know and how do we adjust it?
So that's where one of the more expensive tools that is involved comes in. If you do a lot of gear sets, you'll end up with something like this. It's a dial torque wrench. It measures rotational force. You can also use an inexpensive beam bender type of torque wrench to do that. You add or subtract shims according to what you're measuring your rotational torque at.
Okay, so just like when we did the 14 bolt,
Just like on the 14 bolt.
we're gonna check and see what the preload is, and this stack of shims here will help adjust that.
That adjusts that. That
Okay.
sets that. Yeah, so we're very close to doing final assembly.
In the kit, we also had some of these other parts here, so
Okay,
What are all
so
these?
this is a crush sleeve, right? We saw the crush sleeve on the 14 bolt. We put a crush sleeve eliminator on the 14 bolt. Chevy and Dodge Dana 60s of a certain vintage essentially already have this crush sleeve eliminator in. So they've got this piece that comes up right there, and you just put the shims up there.
it's already machined in. We don't have to worry
Already
about
machined in, you don't have to worry about it. If you're working on like a newer Ford axle, like a Super Duty axle, that's what you use the crush sleeve for. Or if you're using this is all the same bearings and everything that you would use to set up a rear Dana 60.
Okay.
And so,
And a rear would need that, right?
not all rears.
Okay.
It just depends on the vintage, really.
Gotcha.
So they do the kits, and the kits come with shims for ones that need shims, and the kits come with a crush sleeve. So if you get your kit and you don't pull a crush sleeve out of your axle, crush sleeves suck. So get rid of it. Nobody likes crush sleeves. So if you don't have a crush sleeve, no big deal. And so you have a
We had
couple
some
other
other
things here.
pieces.
So this piece right up here, if your axle has been into, you might not have this piece because a lot of people take this out. This just restricts oil. It essentially goes right there on the outside of everything, away from everything, and all it does is restricts oil to the seal. So it helps the seal everything in.
Okay, that just keeps the pressure of the oil
Yeah,
from
keeps the pressure of the oil from
bearings.
possibly blowing out the seal. It sucks to have leaks and stuff like that. And then,
then
yeah,
new
this
washer?
is just a new washer for the yoke. So, and varying brands will come with varying things. And so you pretty much, if this is your first time doing a Dana axle, you need to disassemble your Dana axle, get your master rebuild kit, see what came out, and see what you have. Because what came out is what you're gonna use.
Unless you don't have the oil slinger, then you're going to add that on there too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, so now that we've got the second pattern run, and it's obviously a little bit different, but tell me what's going on here.
So if you look at it, we've still got this little knife edge on the bottom here. So we know the pinion is still a little bit too deep. So we're still working on pinion depth.
All right, and so in that case, we're going to take out more shims so that we can bring that out just a little bit more, right?
Right, we can bring it out a little bit more. And so when I do gear setups, this is the way I was taught how to do it. So our backlash is not dead set. So you can see that the tooth is a little bit far towards the outside of the ring gear. So because our backlash is a little bit wide. When we get the backlash set, that will move that whole pattern in. And typically speaking, if you're really, really close on the backlash, which we are, we're just barely outside of spec, then it will not change the overall pattern up and down, root to, it won't change that. It will just change where it is front to back, because you're looking to get as centered as possible on the tooth, top to bottom, inside to outside, the whole 9 yards, nice rounded edges. So when I do gears, I concentrate on one thing at a time. So we have the backlash in the ballpark, and we're concentrating on pinion depth. We don't even have any shims to set preload on the bearings or anything like that right now. We're just getting the bearings tight so there's no play in it. We're zeroing them. And then we're working on pinion depth. When we have our pinion depth set, we will work on backlash, which will be easy because we have carrier bearings. And then we will do pinion bearing preload. And then as a final, we will run a whole nother pattern when everything is set, all the new bearings are on, just to verify. So we're gonna take some more shims out. We're a lot closer and get this buttoned up here soon.
So just to make sure, when you say setting backlash and the carrier bearing, the shims are the ones that go inside carrier bearings.
Yes.
Right here. We can adjust that left to right.
Yeah, yeah.
And what does that end up doing for us?
So you need to have a little bit of distance in between there, because you need a place for the oil to go when this is all running around. It can't ever run just metal on metal. It will ruin things. So if your backlash is too close, you'll actually burn your gears up. If your backlash is too wide, you'll get, instead of an oil film, you'll get a whole bunch of oil in there, and it will push everything apart, and you'll break gears. That's all there is to it. And the backlash is really, really important because it sets the exact distance that you need. Because you can see that we've got that much room there. That's, I think we measured it 12 or 13.
Yeah.
Spec on this, I think, is 6 to 10.
So we gotta bring it down just a little bit.
So we got to bring it down just a little bit. So all the measurements on a ring and pinion, like there's no one measurement that's more important than the other one, because all the measurements work together.
Right.
So you need to get everything correctly done, and you'll have gears that'll last 200,000 miles instead of 50,000 miles. Oh, and another thing that we need to talk about on the front here.
Yeah.
So this is a low pinion axle. So when you're going forward, this is actually driving on the coast side. Okay. So on the rear axle, low pinion, once again, it's driving on the drive side. And so coast side on this is more important than the drive side, which is not typical in the rear. So if you have a high pinion axle, it's driving on the drive side, but a low pinion axle drives on the coast side.
All right, Eric, tell us about what we're seeing here.
So we're much closer on the pattern right here. So you can see we've got rounded edges, top and bottom there. It's a little bit knifey, a little bit edgy on that, but you can see we painted patterns on 2 different spots here. So you can see that we're still a little bit high. And then you come over here and look at this pattern right here, and you can see that we're on the edge there, but we're also a little bit high here on the coast side.
So what we're looking at is that the pattern is towards the edge of the tooth up here.
Yeah, towards the outside of the tooth up here.
It's kind of cutting off the top of our pattern, so it's hard to tell.
But you're starting to get that round edge right over here.
Got it.
And you're not quite over here. So at this point, you want to get your backlash when you're this close. You want to get your backlash dead on, because that will change the pattern just slightly. And then we will probably take out maybe 2 or 3 thousandths of an inch.
So when we're looking here, we're trying to get a nice round pattern all the way around.
Right.
But because our backlash isn't set, the backlash changes where the pattern is on the tooth, right?
Top and bottom. Yep.
Right.
Or
So
from here to here.
So it's going to move it from forward to back?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. But that will, because of the angle here, it'll push it down in there farther.
Yep. And the pattern will probably get better. And
So we've taken the carrier in and out, set the pinion depth, and we've got the backlash all set up. We're starting our final assembly here, and we've got the oil restrictor, which we're using shims, measured out to the same thickness in our test fit. So now this is going in. It's kind of shaped like a hat, and that goes in with the hat pointed up towards the pinion nut. So it fits up in the pinion slot there. And then we're using a small shim, because That's all that's needed for this. And we're still using the test race that we made. We ground it down just a little bit so that it's easy to get in and out. And that should be probably our last test fit, getting everything back together to run our final pattern. We'll see how that turns out here in just a minute.
So we're doing our final assembly on the pinion right here. There's a couple of things that if your axle's been gotten into before that you might not have. So this right here is a little restrictor just to help keep pressure off of the pinion seal. So your upper pinion bearing goes on first, and then that just goes on there like that. And then you have, obviously you need to put your pinion seal in like that. We'll actually drive that in. That goes on, and then most of these kits do come with a new washer that goes right there, and then you just put everything together and your pinion is done.
The final pattern was run, and we soon received the correct locker. The install was pretty quick and easy. By pulling out the cross pin, the spider gears basically fell out. Then all we had to do was line up the two halves of the locker in the carrier and insert the new cross pin and keeper. With that buttoned up, the carrier could be reinstalled in the axle.
Differential back in the axle here. Everything seems to be meshing well. Nice smooth engagement. Got the bearing caps torqued down to 85 foot-pounds for a day of 60, and ready to put the cover back on. Slid the axles in. Everything is turning together, which is actually really cool to see, and pretty excited. Get new cover on. Everything's sealed. Once it's had time to dry, get some new oil in there. It's time for break-in.
All right, Ryan, what are we doing?
We replaced the inner axle seals on my Dana 60, but can't get the carrier out of the housing, so we decided to upgrade to some mechanical muscle. We're using the winch to try and pull the carrier out.
Well, is it going to be smart or is it going to be stupid? Well, we're about ready to find out.
Let's see how this goes.
All right. Nice and slow.
I think it's gonna work. Nope.
All right.
We need a better knot.
All right, let's see what I can do. All right, better not. Try it again.
Carrier 1, us 0 so far. Round 2.
Oh! It worked.
We got the new seals installed and slammed the axle back together again. The gears need to be broken in and serviced before the upcoming Blazer Grass trip to Moab, Utah. Stay tuned to see how the Jimmy and our other trucks did at Blazer Bash. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching Uinta Garage.
doesn't matter either way.
Ryan? Okay, tell us what we're doing.
Deer in headlights.
That's the Ryan I know.